In the face of an unpredictable future, we are all called upon each and every day to think of out-of-the-box ways to tackle challenges to our environment, well-being, or how to enjoy that Beethoven symphony at your noisy train station. Welcome to the Grand Challenges podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to these challenges and are here to share stories about their own personal journey towards making our world a better place. I'm your host, Peter Marcus Bach, a music geek and experimenter with a passion for connecting across expertise and providing you access to knowledge from the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. My guest today is Sofia Boarino, an architect and musician who also goes by the name of Loto. Sofia obtained her architectural master's degree in urban soundscapes at the Academy of Architecture Mendrisio in Switzerland, and has been experimenting with how sound design can create more vibrant, healthy, and comfortable places while also linking humans with nature. Today's show is truly an assault on the senses as we explore the intricacies of urban soundscapes from the landscape, biological, and human dimensions. We discuss the need for a shift from a visually dominated society to one that embraces the vibrations of sound. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at petermbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining, and please enjoy the show. Welcome to the show, Sofia.
Thank you very much.
It's going to be interesting today because I've had an architect on this show before, but you come from a very different angle, and it's the topic of sounds and urban soundscapes. So I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about that aspect, because I've always thought that architecture is, stereotypically about drawings, but in your case, it seems to be something completely different, or at least we're touching upon a sense that isn't as thought about as much. So definitely looking forward to having you here today.
Thank you. I'm also very excited.
What listeners, I guess, will not notice, though, is unlike previous guests, you brought an entire musical setup today. We're recording this on my dining table, and I've got this makeshift recording studio here with every possible damping piece of household item I can find. But we'll post a picture in the show notes. But you brought the OP1, which is it's like a synthesizer kind of... it's like an electronic musical instrument, and it looks like a makeshift piano with a few added buttons. You brought a massive device for looping sounds, and a microphone. And one of your passions, other than architecture, which you've somehow combined with architecture, is music production. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Yes. So I make music as a Loto, which is the lotus flower in Italian. And it started from my passion for singing. I have been singing for as long as I can remember, and I always liked to write. Then during my first years of university, I discovered that I could compose. And then I bought the OP1. That was the first instrument that I bought after, the classic guitar. And I really love this powerful little machine because you can experiment so much with it. And there is also the sampling function, which I love, and it allows you to record the sounds that surround you, the sounds of the environment, the noises of the daily life, and transform it into music. And that's something that somehow I brought to architecture as well. I would say that I make music in two ways, and one is more conventional. I just recently formed a band, and I'm super excited. And another way is more experimental, and that happens when the music really stems from architecture and design and art. And in this case, there is no preconceived structure. It's a pretty free composition, and sometimes there are sounds from the environment that join the conversation and the composition. And this often results in sound performances.
So experimental music, I've delved into that a bit. Well, not myself, but I do play the piano, and I started since I was 4 years old. Haven't played much in recent years, but I always enjoyed it, and I do find a certain connection to music. So you perform as Loto, as an individual, but you've recently formed the band. What's the band's name, by the way?
Well, it's always Loto, because
Loto.
It's the project that I so far dealt with by myself. And now there is a whole team of mainly friends that joined.
Okay, so it's in a way the identity you've created for yourself, and now really the project.
Well, I would say yes, that the project expanded a little bit. So Loto project expanded, and I really believe in collaboration, and therefore there are some friends and musicians that I really like, that I just decided to have on board. And now we're a team and I'm super excited.
Nice. And so you started singing when you were young, when you were a kid, basically.
Yeah.
And after that, you realized you could compose, and this opened up a lot of doors to what you end up doing now.
Yes.
And before the show, we were actually having an interesting chat. You called yourself a weird architect, or you said you were weird in a way. What do you mean by that?
Well, I would say that I really like to expand the architectural discourse to other disciplines, music and science, for example. And therefore, I would say I am not really fitting into the architectural classical or ordinary categories. And what we discussed before was that normally architects are visual people, and I'm not really visual. I'm more auditory in the way of learning about things. There are 3 types. One is kinesthetic, visual, and auditory. And most of architects, as is a visual profession, are visual. And I'm mostly auditory and kinesthetic. So that's, I guess, also why I decided to introduce music into my way of making architecture.
And so kinesthetic is, I guess, learning by doing, by touch.
Yes.
Rather than learning by hearing or learning by visuals.
Yes.
Yeah. And so in a way you position yourself into those 2 categories, auditory and kinesthetic.
I would say so.
Yeah. In a way, this relates to the nature of the sound work, or the way you bring music and sound into the architecture, because I guess you don't focus necessarily on sound as a whole, but you look more at this idea of sound being vibrations.
Yes, definitely.
Because I guess if we reflect back on, I guess, what acoustics are, and I'm not an acoustic expert, but we know that sound waves are physical waves and they will vibrate at a certain frequency. And depending on that frequency, you will end up with a certain sound generated. The lower frequencies are usually the more bassier sounds, and the higher frequencies are the more shrieking kind of sounds or higher pitch sounds, right?
Yeah. I mean, the whole auditory spectrum is very wide, especially compared to the one of vision. When talking about the auditory spectrum, it's quite interesting to notice that the human ear has 3 times more neural connections to the brain than the eye does. So we can hear from 20 hertz, which is 20 beats per second, to 20,000 hertz. And this corresponds to 8 octaves, while the visual range corresponds barely to 2 octaves. Therefore, we are actually designed to perceive sounds in a far more impactful way than vision. And also, there are many authors and philosophers and architects that describe how hearing is the most powerful of the senses, because it creates a sense of interiority that allows for connectedness and intimacy, as opposed to the sense of vision, that is the sense of exteriority and of the solitary observer. Palasma, that is a Finnish architect, was describing this in one of his books, and he specialized all his career on sensorial architecture. So
Palasma, Finnish architect.
Yeah.
What's the book called?
The Eyes of the Skin.
The Eyes of the Skin.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting visual image I have in my head. I guess that sort of signifies that I'm more of a visual thinker. At least that's what people tell me as well. But I guess what you've just laid out is something that I found quite fascinating reading one of the papers that you've got. And that is that, in a way, our society is very oculocentric, I guess, working with the eyes. And when you mention that sound, in a way, is omnidirectional, and you just explained with the ears, us having 3 times more neurons within our ears, it kind of makes sense that if our society is so based on vision and the ocular aspects, that we maybe should be looking into the more acoustics and auditory or oral qualities of urban spaces if we want to capitalize or create much more vibrant environments or much more enjoyable environments.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I really think it's important to acknowledge on one side the environmental crisis we are in, and on the other side, the at least partial failure of the oculocentric society and the oculocentric design, because design contributed to this large rationalized spatial mechanism that we inhabit today. And this spatial mechanism rarely takes care of the actual physiological and psychological needs of the human being. And therefore, I really think it is important to think about a new ecology, an ecology of vibration that allows to create a connection with the world and with the environment, and that enables us to find new strategies that are urban strategies or architectural strategies that can allow for a deeper sense of care and a deeper sense of attachment.
And I guess to put it in simple terms, if I'm in an urban environment, my eyes can only see so much. I don't have eyes on the back of my head, although sometimes we all wish we do. But we can hear pretty much all around us. And I guess we perceive almost just as much of the space, or if not more, through sound.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the whole world as we know it today is the manifestation of vibrational frequencies. All of it, on every scale. If you look at on the one hand of the scale, there is the theory of strings. And if you look on the other side of the scale, there is the origin of the universe. I mean, the first picture taken of the universe with ESA Planck telescope is of plasma cloud. And NASA researchers found out that the first organizing pattern that came out of the chaos was one single frequency tone, very low frequency tone.
Uh-huh.
And that rippled through the plasma cloud and provided their organization pattern. And that's how the universe and the galaxies, how we know them today, have been created. And that's amazing. I mean, if you also want to look more into it, there's the discipline of cymatics. And those physics experiments, they really show you visually how matter is held together by vibration and sounds, and how shapes and forms that surround us are like this because of vibration. Therefore, it's quite relevant when we understand that everything around us vibrates and everything around us is somehow held together by sound, that listening becomes super important, a very fundamental practice.
So not just in the, I guess, architectural aspects, but also just in the fundamental nature of our universe, vibrations, which in the end produce sounds, plays a critical role. But I guess, how do we get here? So you've already told me about how you got interested in music and that bridge of experimental music and bring it into architecture. What about the more architectural aspect? What made you decide to study architecture? Because realizing you could compose, you could have gone into music in general. Mm-hmm. What's the journey there?
Yeah, so I decided to study architecture because it was more of an intuition. I didn't want to do something too artistic, and I also was very practical somehow. I mean, and I decided to study it, I think, mainly because I always enjoyed spaces and I always enjoy like beautiful houses. And my mom has an incredible taste for design and art. And I was lucky enough to be surrounded by very beautiful design objects. She kind of transmitted me this passion. I think also to her I owe some unconscious aesthetics, because she made me travel a lot when I was a little child, from 0 to 3 years old a lot, and then from 3 to 6 also a lot. And we visited countless museums, countless art exhibitions and historical places. And I don't remember anything of all of this.
I was going to ask about that, because I think I don't remember much from my travels when I was young.
Yeah, I don't remember anything. I mean, I remember a painting of Klimt that I really loved. This, I really have it vivid in my mind, but most of the other things I don't remember. However, I am sure they are stored somewhere in my brain, and they contributed to form the person that I am and what I like and why I like art and all these things. So I didn't really go into music because I didn't know yet when I was there that I could really do something about it. I also wanted a profession that was practical in a certain sense, and therefore I went for architecture, and I'm so happy I did because I'm in love with architecture.
You studied architecture in Mendrisio, Switzerland?
Yeah, at Accademia di Architettura of Mendrisio, that is in Ticino, the Italian part of Switzerland.
So in a way, a lot of the visual stimuli, which is kind of ironic because you talk a lot about the auditory, but the visual stimuli that you gathered and the experiences of art during your childhood and growing up led you to then pursue something that had a practical, I guess, use in the end. And so I guess this was a traditional architectural degree. What's the structure of this kind of architectural degree?
Well, the architectural degree that I took in Mendrisio is an ordinary one because there is no other way to do it in Mendrisio. It's not like ETH or other big campuses. But what is really special about the Academy of Mendrisio is that you really work in small groups with well-affirmed architects. And there I had the chance to meet many of them and establish with them a personal connection and a creative connection. And that was definitely super inspiring. It's really thanks to the people I met that I was so greatly inspired. I could say, for example, Anne Holtrop and Riccardo Blumer inspired me quite a lot because they have a way of approaching design that is also scientific and experimental and research-based. Bijoy Jain from Studio Mumbai also, because it has a very introspective approach to architecture. And those things made me realize, through the introspective approach, I was thinking, okay, I love singing. I have this talent and I want to bring it in architecture. And there I tried to figure it out how.
And then in a way you realized you could compose and the doors opened.
Yes, also on this other side. And this came really kind of at the same time, the same year I started university. It was because of a friend, an architect that I met. He plays the guitar and makes amazing music. And all of a sudden I just thought, okay, I think I can sing on your music. and it happened. And then I just told myself, well, I think I can play an instrument. And then I started. And I'm not a professional, I'm not like you that I started when I was very young to play an instrument and I played for so many years. But I'm an emotional composer and my music is made of very simple and very few elements. And that's it so far.
I guess I wouldn't call myself a profession, no. I mean, I started at age 4, but it was always, in a way, a hobby. And I could call it, a backup career in case me going for engineering studies decided to fall apart. Turns out I do what I do now as an engineer and an urban planner. And yeah, in a way, I try to maintain my interest in the music in some form or another, whether it's listening to experimental music, talking to musicians, or just fiddling around with different types of equipment, or doing this podcast even.
Yeah.
So in a way, that moment of realizing you could compose, paved the way forward for you. You knew where your specialization or where your unique advantage would be in architecture. And that was addressing the oral qualities, as you would say, or the auditory senses in design.
Yes, when I started to introduce sound as a design element within architecture, I really discovered its power and I didn't let this go. I just started to design all the projects with that element and with that quality. And I just grew passionate about it.
And so you decided to make some literal noise in this field of architecture.
Yes. And that's because I've always been fascinated about the idea of being able to listen to what surrounds us. I mean, imagine if you could listen to the mountains and to seas and to fields and trees and rocks and cities. how beautiful would it be to encounter them? And therefore, I think, what if we would make architecture that speak and sing about its ecosystem on the notes of a common language? How positively impactful would the outcome be? And I also discovered that while I was designing using sound as a fundamental design element, it was surprising for myself and for everyone to perceive this added quality into the projects, and therefore I really stuck to it.
And so the real opportunity you got to then put this into design was when you then went on after your bachelor's in Mendrisio to do the master's also in Mendrisio.
Yeah, definitely. When you pass the first 3 years and you acquire more freedom, then you're free to experiment a lot, and that's what I did there.
And during the time when you were doing your studies, you also visited quite a few places around the world to do some projects as well, right?
Yes, I did. I went to South America for some workshops, and I also went to Chile specifically. Then I went to Peru for exchange, and that was also a very exciting time. And I've been to America as well, to California. I was in contact, and later on I became a fellow of Mad Workshop Foundation in Los Angeles. And then England, Germany, other places where I've been also before starting architecture, to figure out if I would have really liked it. And what's funny is that the first place in which I went, the first office, was in Lyon in France. And there, through that experience, I understood I could do music.
Nice.
And not architecture. It's there that I found my friend, the friend that is the guitar. Yeah. And from that moment on, when we meet each other, we are just full on music. We don't even speak about architecture.
You sing your conversation out rather than speak it out.
Well, that would be lovely. But
so in a way, travel has been the key that has inspired you when you were young, really the art pieces, the museums you visited, and then even during your studies, the one element that has reinforced, I guess, your passion for music, your passion for sound and for architecture.
Yes, definitely. I always had this rule that I could go on holidays only if it was something formative. So I never really had the relaxing holidays.
I guess I see travel in a similar way. When I go to a new city, I don't necessarily stick to the touristy stuff. I try to experience the city for what it offers, for what it is.
Yeah.
I guess now I will also attempt to experience it for what it sounds like as well.
Definitely, you should.
To come back to the soundscape aspects, this idea of sound in an urban environment or just generally in the landscape, you mentioned the mountains, you mentioned the forests. This actually has gained increasing awareness. And from what I read in some of the works you gave with the background information that you provided, this movement actually started in the 1960s already.
Yes, it was the soundscape movement, and it raised quite a lot of awareness towards environmental sounds. An example of themes treated during that movement was the rescue of whales. They really tried to bring the cause close to the heart of people by making the whales sing. Now we think about the whale songs and the whales' voices, and this way of promoting a campaign of awareness through sound had a huge impact.
And I suppose it's, when you think about it biologically, marine life, a lot of animals communicate by echolocation, as they call it.
Yes.
By emitting sound waves, like dolphins as well.
Yeah. All fish. It's incredible. If you would tune your ears, your human ears, to listen to fish, the ocean is extremely loud and noisy. They communicate through sound waves that are inaudible to us. And through water, the transmission is very efficient. And I think it's very funny to imagine that the ocean is not silent as we perceive it.
Interesting. And so the soundscape movement has I guess, gains quite a lot of, attention in day-to-day life as well. For example, I have been looking up a bit about sound in researching for this particular show or this particular episode. And for example, I work with decibel levels, or at least I'm more familiar with the decibel levels. So for example, a refrigerator, they say that a refrigerator reaches up to 50 decibels, whereas an airplane taking off is 140. And the higher you go, the louder it gets. Same for, say, a baby crying, which is around 110, which I think this was also published a lot in Popular Science, that baby cries can be very loud. But I suppose from your angle, it's not just about, you've already mentioned the vibrations. From your angle, it's not just about the loudness of it, but it is about the frequency or the vibrations. And so when I give you these numbers, these different elements, these different urban items or urban experiences that we have, what comes into your mind when you think about them?
Yeah, basically, it's very important to think about frequencies and not only volume. There are some disciplines that study how the human brain and body reacts to certain type of sounds. And this is, for example, psychoacoustic. And you can notice that given the experimentations that have been done, there are infrasounds that are below 20 hertz and ultrasounds that are above 2000 hertz that create real physical damage on humans. And that's why infrasounds, for example, are used by some countries as military weapons, because they affect you psychologically, they create anxiety and fear, and they affect you physically, because they create nausea and headache.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the same thing happens with sounds when they are over a certain decibel level. For example, over 85 decibels, you start to damage your ears. And that is why in urban planning, there are some restrictions about noise pollution, or like some directions about how to contain it. And normally the limit is 60 decibels.
Okay. So that's an interesting take on, I guess, the different types of sounds, and even, I guess, the ones that we may not be able to hear but can still damage us irrespective of that. You mentioned, in a way, design has focused a lot, at least the traditional approach to designing for noise pollution, I quote from your paper, has been almost solely in terms of isolation, absorption, and protection. But this is, in a way, trying to hide the sounds, whereas your approach or your philosophy is, in a way, trying to work with the sounds, trying to make the sounds more accessible and, I guess, more experiential for people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is quite crazy that we live in a world that is designed for deaf people, basically, when the strongest sense we have is hearing. We still approach sound as a problematic. I think it's a pity we still approach sound merely in terms of isolation and protection. And this is what was the idea that was developed during the industrialization time. And now it's time to surpass this, and it's time to acknowledge sound as a fundamental design element. All the greatest monuments of the past were somehow seeking some very special acoustic properties and special reverberations. And we as architects have to be aware of the fact that architectures and spaces are like huge instruments that contain sound, modify sound, sometimes even create sound, and therefore exerts a huge impact on humans and on the environment. And we can see that because, as I said before, the influence that sound has on humans and on different species is huge.
And I guess one word that relates in particular to what you work on in this idea of frequency is resonance.
Yes.
There's a quote that you use, which is, "All objects have a soul that can be released via sound," by John Cage.
Yes.
I find this quite fascinating, and this idea of resonance, because I guess going through engineering, I learn resonance in terms of mechanical aspects. There's the famous video of a bridge collapsing because of resonance.
Yes, exactly. Tacoma Bridge. That's it. Yeah, I mean, resonance is super powerful. I approached it for the first time with the project Sounds of Etna, and when I looked at cymatics and the experiments there, it was quite clear for me what resonance was able to do and how it can influence matter. it's something like you said that mechanical engineers know very well. And I worked with some of them also to patent some formulas. And for them, it was quite weird that I asked them to work in the opposite way than what they're usually used to work.
In the opposite way?
Yes, because normally you dimension a bridge so that it does not resonate with the wind, for example, like in case of Tacoma Bridge that collapsed in a few seconds because the resonant frequency of the bridge matched the resonant frequency of the wind at that point. And then in a few minutes, it just collapsed. And I asked them to do the opposite. I wanted some pieces of my design to resonate with some aspects of the environment and some sounds of the environment. And then with some little corrections, and you can make them not collapse.
That's interesting. So they must have been quite unsure or quite scared when you come and tell them, hey, don't do it the way you're normally used to. Do it differently. What was the conversation like?
Well, they were very surprised. And I also had to reach people a bit all over the world to try to do what I wanted, but they were also very curious and they perceived the potential of it. And that's what I really like about interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work, because in the end, people are very enthusiastic about broadening their horizons.
It's lovely to see that, you know, this stereotype that the perception that disciplines don't want to work together doesn't normally play out that way when we actually try.
No, definitely. It's the opposite. I am super, super happy to work and collaborate with scientists. I've just attended a workshop of 3 weeks with neuroscientists. And I walked out of that workshop enriched. Very, very, very enriched. Far more than any other architecture workshop I could attend.
Lovely experience. And so coming back to the work that you've done, there's really a few key projects that have shaped who you've become and the expertise that you have to share. And in a way, it's framed around these terms that you've sort of defined. There's the technophonist, the geophonist, and the biophonist design. And I guess empathy also plays a role in some form or another in this design. You mentioned one project already called The Sounds of Etna. I guess this was the geophonist design approach that you adopted. So let's uncover that a bit more. So what do we mean by geophonist? This is, I guess, this phonist meaning sound or hearing, and geo being the more landscape level type of auditory experience.
Yeah. So geophonics are the sounds that are produced by geophysical activity. And the project Sounds of Etna, of course, deals with the Etna volcano. It's a sensorial pavilion located on the slopes of Etna volcano that is designed to make the infrasonic voice of Etna perceivable through sight and touch, because it's clearly not perceivable through sound. Etna volcano is one of those volcanoes with a great singing talent. Even the myth of the giant Encelado recounts that the goddess Athena confined the giant under Sicily, and from that moment, his angry breaths and screams create the volcanic activity of Etna. Of course, the sonic and infrasonic activity of the volcano is recorded and well documented by the research of the Institute of Volcanology and Geophysics in Catania. And for me, it was very interesting to discover that infrasounds are actually happening also before eruption, during eruption, and after eruptions, and they can last for days or even weeks. And of course, the striking quality, as I mentioned before, is that you cannot hear them, but they strongly affect you. And therefore, I thought, okay, what's the only way I can make this perceivable for humans? And that was through vibration. And that's how then I approach the theme of resonance. And through the application of a specific formula, I designed this pavilion so that when infrasonic activity occurs, the visitor is walking underground in the darkness of the underground of the space. And then the infrasonic activity happens, and there are a series of metal sheets that are placed inside the space. They start to vibrate because they resonate to vibrate with the infrasonic activity of the volcano.
So you built a pavilion that essentially responds to the sounds of the volcano and gives the user, in a way, an amplified experience when they're in that pavilion.
Exactly. Yeah. And I didn't build it. It was just a project, unfortunately, so far. But yes.
And I guess there's a recording on your website as well, which we'll put in the show notes so that listeners can hear what the volcano sounds like as well.
Yes, this recording was a composition between some recordings of the geophysics activity of the volcano that I took from the Institute of Catania, merged with the composition Etna Plays the Piano made by Roberto Barbera. And it's a quite scary composition.
Sounds quite ominous. I had to listen to it.
Okay, yeah.
So that was the geophonic example, and in a way dealing with large landscape elements. And so there's also the biophonic, which is also still dealing with the natural system, but at a much smaller scale. I believe it's more plant-based, biological systems.
Definitely, yes.
And this was another project you did called Sound Greenfall, published in a magazine, a winning article, a winning entry to a magazine.
Yes, Horizonte magazine. Yes, Sound Greenfall is an installation that is designed to be placed in nature in a flourishing garden that plays a serenade of beneficial sound waves to plants and humans. This project was born from my interest in the sound of plants. So I started to research the topic, and recent bioacoustic studies discovered that plants actually communicate and entertain real conversations between each other and with the surrounding environment.
Okay.
And it happens both above ground and below ground, and through chemical signals and acoustic signals. And mainly it happens underground through the roots that are considered by some biologists as the brain of the plants. And what was striking for me is that not only the plants are able to emit acoustic signals, but they're also able to receive them and respond to them. So exactly like humans, when you expose some plants to certain frequencies for a certain amount of time, then you could modify germination rates, you could modify growth rates, uptake of oxygen, make them stronger, and therefore there was no need to use chemicals to protect them. And the striking one was that at a certain frequency, sound could modify mRNA gene expression, and it was basically substituting light in the life cycle of the plant. Therefore, I took that frequency for my design and I wanted to amplify that frequency. And thanks to the technical specifics of the installation, the sound passes through the structure. The structure itself becomes resonant, like a waterfall of sound waves, and then it's transmitted to the ground and from the ground to the roots of the plants.
I always thought that singing to your plants to make them grow was a myth, but it seems like there's actual scientific work and proof around it.
It's true.
So my mind is being blown right now.
It's true. And what was even more important for me is to realize how similar we are. I mean, why do we forget that we are animals? And this project that really navigates in between humans and plants wants to open up a reflection on the interconnectedness of the world and shift the anthropocentric vision of design to the plant realm.
So Sound Greenfall was a physical installation that works with these frequencies that match what humans and plants would both have in common.
Yes, definitely. It was physical. It was, again, metal sheets driven into the ground. And exactly like you said, this frequency that was so beneficial for plants, that is so beneficial for plants, is also beneficial for men because it is associated to REM sleep and meditation frequencies.
Oh, interesting.
And therefore explained our interconnection with the environment.
I've learned something new. I think we're really shifting away from a very anthropocentric view in the designs that we have nowadays and really trying to incorporate nature a lot more. I myself work in nature-based solutions. And so in a way I can see how biomimicry or just doing things the way nature does it already gives us huge benefits. and at the fraction of the cost most of the time as well.
Definitely. I really think that is important to understand that when we create spaces or environments that are beneficial for the other living forms on the planet and for the environment, their liberation and their well-being is also ours.
Very true. And so these are the sounds you've worked with in the natural environment, but you've also worked in the more urban environment. And one thing that struck me as soon as I looked at your portfolio was that you recorded a train station in Chiasso in Switzerland. And this is the technophonic project that you worked on, which is called Hit the Beat.
Yes.
Which is a pretty cool name.
Thank you. Yes, I developed this project for my diploma, and it's an urban project designed for the redevelopment of the station area of Chiasso. And it involves the construction of a sound art master school, a concert hall for experimental music and art, the conversion of the buildings attached to the station in Center for Immigrants and Event Hall, and then the renovation of the station itself. All these interventions are linked together by an urban park. And with this project, not only the program is dedicated to music, but sound is the main design element there. And that's because Chiasso is pervaded by sounds, and they are not really made for human ears to be listened to because they are super harsh. As you said, they are technophonies, so they come from the railway infrastructure, they come from the highway infrastructure, and they're very harsh sounds. However, it was very interesting for me when I was on site to record and understand better the territory, that the urban fabric feels loose and weak, and it lacks identity also. And then sound always links the missing and fills up the urban voids and orients. It really is the main characteristic of Chiasso. And therefore, instead of approaching it in terms of isolation or as a problem, I thought of transforming it into a creative opportunity. And that was possible because of the program, as it's music and leisure. Then I said, okay, let's transform the Chiasso soundscape into an open-air sound library for the students that are part of the School of Electronics and Experimental Music, so they could get inspired from the environment. And therefore, the whole projects and all the buildings that are part of the plot, they open up to the station, to the stream of sounds that come from the station. And also the buildings themselves do that. They want to establish a connection with the air of the city, and therefore they have a very light structure, and they're very transpiring and flexible, so that they could provide multiple connections with the soundscape of Chiasso.
So it's almost like accepting the sounds, or dare I say noise, in Chiasso, and saying, this is what's iconic about the city, and this is what we should embrace rather than try to remove.
Yeah.
Through this this stereotypical philosophy of isolation, absorption, and protection.
Yes.
We should actually instead embrace it.
Yes.
And so this event hall and experimental music school and all the buildings were basically designed to, I guess, take in that sound.
Definitely.
And people don't mind, or do they become curious when they see this and want to experience it? What's your general impression from talking to people about the project?
Well, the project was very well received by everyone. So I would say that people were enthusiastic about it. And in general, I also think this project works like a piece of music, like a track, because what is noise and what is sound is the same thing.
I guess noise to one person can be music to the ears for someone else.
Exactly. I think it's a lot about the attitude. And of course, we just saw before how certain frequencies do have an impact no matter what. But when you approach everything in a different way, then this also helps to shape your environment in a different way.
And I think this also relates to the fourth project, which really addresses empathy, that I'd like to hear a bit more about, where you really target that more humanistic feel, that empathetic feel by evoking it through sounds.
Yes.
This was called Temenos?
Yes. Temenos is a pavilion of the arts that I designed and built as a first prototype as a sound pavilion. And it's a space that empties itself of everything except what it is designed to contain, the sound. And the project is not only designed to host sound, but was also born from sound, from the practice of singing. Again, when I was working on it at the time, Bijoy, Jane from Studio Mumbai, asked me, Sophie, what do you see when you sing? And for me, this question was quite interesting and revealing, because I realized that I don't see anything. There is no space, there is no time, there is no orientation. I see nothingness and infinity at the same time.
Interesting.
And therefore I thought, okay, let's make a space that cancels itself out as much as possible to highlight what it contains. And therefore I decided to work with light, which is such an ethereal material like sound. It can transform space and flatten and deepen shapes, and it can trick our mind and our perception. And I wanted to achieve the Ganzfeld effect, which is this phenomenon of heightened perception that is caused by the exposure to an unstructured stimulation field. And to achieve this effect, I had to balance very carefully shape and light exposure. In this way, the compact floor plan was defining itself and dissolving into the infinite and boundless perception. When all the visual distractions are cut out, the visitor can really concentrate on the other senses and on the perception of what is contained inside the space and on his own emotions. This doesn't only happen on a theoretical level, but also on a neurological level. And this project brought me close to neuroscience and close to neuroarchitecture. That is a discipline that studies how spaces and certain architectural elements affect your brain. And when reaching and achieving the Ganzfeld effect, basically your brain shifts into alpha and theta state of mind. That is the state of mind of deep relaxation and meditation that enhances creativity, memory, and consciousness and well-being. Basically, the in definition that is reached in Temenos through the Ganzfeld effect also creates a shift into perception and orientation that doesn't happen anymore with the hippocampal cells, but happens with mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are at the basis of empathy. And empathy is a process of internal imitation that happens not only on a neurological level, but also is bodily and it's muscular. And this is why Carl Gross defined empathy as body resonance. And this project precisely strikes to achieve that, this perfect attunement between space, visitor, and the art that is displaced inside. It's almost a biological resonance, what is achieved here.
Would you say it's comfort in discomfort? I guess the reason I bring that up is because we humans obviously feel safe when we are in control of our senses. But if you're cutting off one of the most obvious ones, that visual sense, I almost think that many might start to feel dread or might start to feel a sense of uncertainty. And so is it creating this comfort in discomfort without people realizing it and then creating this wow effect as a result of that?
I'm not sure there is a discomfort, I would say, because the space itself is designed so that you still have orientation points somehow. Technically, I cannot say more, but what I can say is that I actually built a first prototype and people tested it. And I made some questionnaires at the time for the 55 people that were there at the inauguration day. And I asked them, and Temenos succeeded in its purpose. And for me, it's still I still get quite emotional when I think about the last question that was asking, describe yourself in one word after you've exited the space. And the words were incredible. Some people wrote revitalized, reborn, relaxed, in love, sun. I felt flower.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is this exhibition still, or is this setup still available to see somewhere?
No, unfortunately not. It was funded by Mud Workshop Foundation, and it was built in Varese inside the consecrated church.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I had to take it down, but I have it on the top of my wardrobe, and I'm just waiting for the next funds to build another one and improve some qualities and test something else.
Well, you definitely have to let me know if it ever gets exhibited somewhere nearby, because it's certainly something I'm very curious about and would also want to experience. So
I will.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a fascinating project, and in a way wraps up those 4 different areas that I never would have thought about in terms of sounds and what we can address, and then the human experience related to that. We've talked a bit about the senses, especially how Temenos plays with the senses, but you yourself have also undergone some interesting exercises, one being complete sensory deprivation, and the other one, this blind experience. Could you share a bit about that?
Yes. So I think the experience that marked me the most are the experience that creates some sort of unique sensorial perception. And I did experience sensory deprivation bath. That was a unique experience because I was floating in salted water, immersed in darkness and no sounds for 1 hour and a half. And I really lost perception of my body at a certain point. And it really felt like I was floating somewhere in galaxies. It was very beautiful. And at the same time, I think that was not the most powerful sensorial experience because that one was artificial. And by the way, after having taken the bath, when you go back to the world, you rediscover it as a child. Everything is glowing and the senses are heightened. It's a very beautiful experience. But I think I had one that was more striking because it was created by nature itself. And that was when I was in Peru and I decided to start traveling. For 2 months, I traveled with my backpack. It was very exhausting. And I arrived to Bolivia at a certain point and I went to visit Salar de Uyuni. And that was magnificent. The salar was covered by a few centimeters of water. And the water was reflecting the sky perfectly. And at a certain point, just after the sunset, when there are no more shadows, clear shadows, I was looking on the opposite way of the sun. So the sky was already pink and light blue. And I was looking at the horizon. At a certain point, I could not distinguish anymore where the horizon was. It was blurring out. And I felt like I didn't know for a moment if I was standing, if I was lying, if the world was upside down or not. And it was beautiful. I just got lost in that colors.
So you were basically walking or sort of submerged in a very shallow amount of water, several centimeters, but it was enough to create that light reflection.
Yes.
I really should, makes me want to try this experience because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah, you should. It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. It's like you're floating in air and water and color at the same time. And that was really beautiful. The other experience you mentioned, it was called, in Italian, it's called the blind experience. It basically consists of a sensorial pathway that you take with a group of people, and you are guided by blind volunteers. And the aim of this path is it puts you in the perspective of someone visually impaired.
Okay.
And so you cross the city, like a busy market or a busy road or the park in complete darkness. They just recreate that through sounds and objects that you can touch around you. And then the experience finished off with a drink in a cafe that was also completely immersed in darkness. And what's funny when I was thinking about experiences that really had an impact on me is that I recall this experience visually, which is crazy because I didn't see anything around me. And when I think about this cafe, I see the counter. I see the couple that was sitting with us, that she had long hair. And I see the person playing the piano on the left and which piano it is in so much detail. And I have not experienced that visually in any way. So I think this is something that I'm going to explore in the future because it's striking.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I think of sounds, I've heard and read about people perceiving color when they hear sounds. Certain types of music or certain types of pitch represent a certain shade of color.
Yes.
And I guess this was similar to what was happening to you. The auditory experience, in a way, led your mind to create these images and I guess your preconceived notion of what should be in a cafe.
Yeah, definitely. Which is a little sad, because I guess when you want to have this experience, you would like to really exit any preconceived pattern, and in the end your brain just brings you back there.
I guess they're biases that we have inherent in our thinking and our minds based on the experiences we've had prior to that.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've covered a lot of different aspects of sound. It's been fascinating to hear how you've touched upon all these different angles, down to the human experience as well, and sharing some of your own experience working with the senses at a personal level. So where are we heading in this regard? We kind of are facing environmental challenges. We are dealing with cities that have noise pollution. We have to redesign a lot of our infrastructure in the coming decades. What is your vision statement or mission going forward?
Wow, that's a huge question. Well, I'm well aware of the impact that architecture has on man's evolutionary development. And therefore, I think that is the architect's responsibility to take that into account and try to create a positive impact into our built environment. It is important for the arts and architecture to preserve the authenticity of life and experience through the alleviation of the burdens from the contemporary individuals. Alvar Aalto was writing to the Swedish architects in 1957, I think, that the ultimate purpose of architecture is to create a paradise on earth for men. And I agree with that, without the presumption of knowing exactly how to build a paradise on earth, of course. But I think it is worth to try, and it is worth to try to create environments and spaces that provide us with a more optimistic and positive and beautiful perspective of the world. And to do that, it is fundamental we recalibrate our anthropocentric vision on design to the real psychological and physiological needs of men. And in doing so, we cannot forget to create a paradise for the other living beings and for the ecosystem, and to respect our environment. So I wish to do my part in that.
And so I sense the cohabitation philosophy that is trending now in architecture emerging from the stream of thoughts that you're putting forward.
Yes, because I really think that the practice of listening can guide human beings into that. And because, as I said before, hearing creates interiority and therefore a place for coexistence.
And you've already done that to a certain extent in Sound Greenfall, where you looked at the frequencies that relate to both plants and humans. So I guess the natural next step now, having done projects from different perspectives, is to combine all these different phonic aspects.
Yeah, definitely. And also extend the discourse from sound to neuroscience, for example. This is something I'm very passionate about right now, and science and what more.
Sophia, this has been an interesting journey through sound and I guess your experiences in bringing us closer to the senses and helping us relate more to our senses. And so I'd like to finish off with a few key questions that I ask all my guests. And I suppose we've already discussed a lot about what inspires you and your love for music and for design and the art that you saw growing up. But are there any key books, papers, seminars or people that you've met that have completely changed the course of your career mindset during this journey?
Yes, countless. As I mentioned before, people I met played a huge role in that. What I didn't mention before are other famous artists like Marina Abramovic, for example, does performance art I love, and Thomas Saraceno, James Turrell, Anish Kapoor, and many others.
The list goes on.
The list goes along. And I mean, I had a lot of inspirations from them. And also, I think it is worth to mention an exhibition that really touched me. It was curated by Axel Vervoort in Venice at Palazzo Fortuny, and it's titled Intuition. And it was bringing together pieces of art that were very ancient together with contemporary art. And they were all united by the theme of intuition, of imagination, creative energy, creative power, meditation, hypnosis. It was really inspiring, a constellation of beautiful, beautiful designs and beautiful pieces of art that influenced me quite a lot.
In what way?
Because I got to discover like some artists that I didn't know. And I remember there was the piece of art from Anish Kapoor. There was like this white circle. It was the leaflet, the image of the exhibition, and I remember staring at it for quite a while. I guess it has a similar effect than what you perceive inside Temenos. It's just infinite. At a certain point, you get lost into this white landscape. Like that, many other works of art. And books also countless. I could say that I really like books about science and philosophy, poetry especially, and also sometimes novels that are a bit in between reality and fantasy.
Give me an example.
Like Italo Calvino and Alessandro Baricco, because they really describe the world with the eyes of a child. There was so much marvel and fascination, and this inspires me to look at the world in the same way.
I think children view the world as a canvas that there's still so much to uncover, still so much to learn, and everything fascinates them on a daily basis.
Yes, and also there is space for paradoxes and absurdities. And I think it's in those exceptions that you find a bit the magic of things and of the real world too.
And so what was one of the most challenging situations that you've ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
I am at the beginning of my career, but I would say that it is quite challenging to build your own niche, to define this to others and to establish yourself into it. When your work is not mainstream or it is interdisciplinary, then sometimes there is no place in which you can fit in certain universities, associations, or institutions. I think for me, really what I'm facing right now, my difficulty right now is to find support for that. If I want to do a PhD or a research program and finding funds for it, as the topic joins so many disciplines together, it is somehow hard to fit into the propositions of schools. But that's okay, because I think things are evolving and changing, and people are joining the niche. And I'm very confident that this is evolving, and I can't wait for the future to unfold.
Exciting. And so on that note, there's always this issue of time management. You do your music and you do the experimental music as well. I guess it's balancing between the creative music, well, the original or ordinary music that you called it, and this experimental aspect. What tips can you offer in terms of time management?
I don't have any particular tip, because I have not reached a balance between my professional life and my working life. But I'm happy to say that I'm in love with what I do, music and architecture, both of them. And therefore, I tend to work too much, but it's okay. Who doesn't work too much? I'm not sure. And yeah, so then when there are too many things I like to do or that I have to do, I just set priorities and try to stick to them.
And so what advice can you offer to young, aspiring architects who have an interest in sound and urban soundscape design?
To work for it. I really think it is important to bring your own talent and passion into your work, because then what you create is unique and therefore extremely valuable. And I would also encourage young architects to think big, because in the end, all the efforts you do on a daily basis just acquire a different weight when you have a greater challenge ahead.
Lovely advice. Sofia, thank you very much for your time and agreeing to come on the show. I think everyone would agree with me that we've touched upon a topic that hasn't received as much attention as it really deserves to. And it certainly made me curious about going further into this myself as well in the work I do. And thank you to you listeners for your time and company in this very insightful and engaging conversation with Sofia. Where can people reach you if they'd like to get in touch and know more about you?
Well, I have a website. It's sofiaboarino.com. And I have an Instagram profile as Loto. But on my website, you can find everything you need.
And more information about this, as well as to details on the projects and the musical experiences, will be in the show notes.
Yes, follow me on Spotify.
Yes. So I will certainly do that. But Sofia, famous last words, one message for listeners to take away from today?
Yes, I am going to sing you a song that I composed for the vernissage of an exhibition here in Zurich. It's titled Pneuma. Please enjoy.
Thank you. And thank you to you, listeners, for tuning in to this enlightening conversation with Sofia Boarino. As mentioned, you can find links to projects, references, sounds, and interesting musical equipment in our show notes over at petermbach.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this show and are looking forward to more episodes, please do subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you are listening from to be notified of the latest release as soon as it becomes available. I would be incredibly grateful for this, as it helps me to reach a broader audience and, who knows, perhaps encourage greater daily singing to indoor houseplants or inspire generations to listen more closely to the world around us. If you'd like to know more about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website at petermbach.com, my YouTube channel Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on Twitter at petermbach or Instagram at petermbach87. If you have feedback or suggestions, or just know someone who has an inspiring story to offer, please feel free to reach out to me on social media. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Bucolia by Bureaucratic. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to see how they are tackling the grand challenges.